You may think your irritation comes from their arrogance, their tone, their constant need to prove they know more than you do, but something inside you reacts before logic has time to form. Before words are even processed, before the conversation fully begins, you feel a tightening in your chest, a silent urge to defend yourself, an immediate readiness to prove something you were not planning to prove. You tell yourself you dislike their attitude. Yet the intensity of your reaction suggests something far more personal is being touched. You replay their words later, not because they were correct, but because they unsettled a place you prefer to keep hidden. You imagine clever responses you should have given, arguments you will make next time, ways to re-establish your mental position. They walk away unaffected, but you carry the conversation long after it ends. As if something important is still unresolved, you call them arrogant. Yet you feel strangely compelled to demonstrate that you are not beneath them. So the question begins to form quietly: why does their belief in their own intelligence disturb your inner world so deeply? But to understand this, we need to examine what you believe is happening in these moments. When someone behaves as if they are smarter than you, you assume the problem is their ego, their insecurity, or their need for validation. You believe you are simply reacting to their condescending tone, their corrections, or the subtle way they position themselves above others. This belief feels reasonable because their behavior is visible, obvious, and easy to identify as the source of irritation. You tell yourself that anyone in your position would feel the same frustration, because nobody enjoys being spoken down to. You imagine that if they were more humble, more respectful, or more self-aware, your calm would remain intact effortlessly. You rehearse better responses in your head, believing that next time you will handle it with more clarity and composure. This mental rehearsal gives you a sense of control, as if the solution lies in phrasing, timing, or intellectual precision. You feel as though the issue is external, located entirely in their need to assert superiority over you. You see yourself as the reasonable one, forced to tolerate unnecessary displays of ego and mental competition. This narrative protects you from examining your own reaction, because it frames you as the victim of someone else's arrogance. You feel morally right in your irritation, because you are simply defending your dignity and mental space. You convince yourself that the tension would disappear if they stopped trying to prove they are smarter than everyone else. You rarely question why some people like this disturb you deeply, while others do not affect you at all. Instead, you remain focused on the surface explanation that you are simply dealing with someone who lacks humility, and this is where most people misunderstand what's really happening. If this is already making sense to you, it means you're starting to notice patterns most people never see. Subscribe and let's keep exploring how the mind really works. Now, this is where things start to get uncomfortable. A subtle realization begins to surface that your reaction is not only about their arrogance, but about what their behavior quietly triggers inside you. You notice that strangers acting superior rarely disturb you as much as people whose opinions you value or whose presence feels significant. This suggests the irritation is less about intelligence and more about the meaning you attach to who is claiming superiority. When someone important speaks as if they know more than you, it feels like a threat to your place in the social and intellectual hierarchy. You begin to sense that what hurts is not their words, but the implication that you may be seen as less competent or less aware. This turns the interaction into something personal, even if the topic itself is trivial and unimportant. In the larger picture, you argue harder not to correct them, but to restore your sense of being mentally acknowledged and respected. Their tone feels like a quiet dismissal, and your reaction becomes an attempt to recover visibility and significance. You start to realize that the discomfort is less about knowledge and more about recognition. status, and internal security. This realization feels unsettling because it challenges the story that you are. Simply reacting to obvious arrogance, you sense that the tension might be revealing something fragile about how you measure your own intelligence and worth. And this is where things begin to turn inward in a way most people prefer not to explore. Long before you encountered people who spoke with superiority, your brain learned to react strongly when it felt underestimated or overlooked as a child. Being corrected, ignored, or spoken over often created feelings of invisibility that your nervous system marked as socially threatening. Your brain quietly linked being underestimated with the risk of losing attention, respect, and belonging, which are fundamental survival signals. So when someone today behaves as if they are smarter than you, your brain does not treat it as a simple personality trait. It interprets the behavior as a familiar warning sign, activating emotional and physiological responses before rational thought has time to intervene. You feel the surge of tension, the need to explain, the urgency to demonstrate clarity, as if something important is at stake. What you interpret as irritation is often an automatic attempt by your brain to protect your social presence and perceived competence. You are not trying to win an argument. You are trying to prevent yourself from feeling invisible or mentally dismissed. For example, someone interrupts you mid-explanation and corrects a small detail, and you feel a disproportionate wave of irritation rising instantly. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. The tension is not about the correction itself, but about the brain interpreting the interruption as a sign of being undervalued or overlooked. This reaction is conditioned, automatic, and deeply tied to earlier experiences where your voice or thoughts felt disregarded. You replay the moment later, imagining stronger responses that restore your sense of mental presence and recognition. All of this happens without conscious choice, driven by patterns the brain learned long before you understood how they formed. But to understand why this reaction persists, we need to examine what you secretly gain from it. Hidden inside the irritation is a quiet emotional reward that you rarely notice because it feels justified and automatic. Feeling challenged by someone as superiority gives you an opportunity to mentally prove to yourself that you are equally or more capable. You begin to feel sharper, more alert, more mentally engaged, as if the situation has activated a deeper level of awareness. This mental activation feels strangely satisfying because it reassures you that your intelligence is present, ready, and responsive under pressure. Their arrogance becomes a stage where you can silently rehearse your competence, strengthening your sense of identity without saying a word. You replay the interaction later, not only to correct it, but to relive the feeling of being mentally prepared and capable. This subtle payoff explains why the irritation lingers, because it also reinforces a narrative where you are thoughtful, observant, and intellectually aware. Without this contrast, you might have to sit with uncertainty about how competent or intelligent you truly feel in quieter moments, so the discomfort becomes a strange form of validation, proving that your mind is active, alert, and ready to defend its place. You may resist this idea because it challenges the belief that you only want peace when part of you benefits from the tension. This is why letting go of the irritation feels unfamiliar, because you would also lose the quiet reassurance it provides, and this is where the pattern becomes deeply uncomfortable to examine over time. Reacting to people who think they are smarter than you becomes part of how you describe yourself and your personality. You begin to say you have little tolerance for arrogance, as if this reaction is a sign of awareness and strong self-respect. This identity feels consistent, reliable, and familiar, giving you a predictable emotional script in these interactions. Even before conversations begin, you expect condescension, and this expectation prepares your mind to react before anything happens. For example, you meet someone confident and articulate, and you already feel a quiet readiness to defend your intelligence. If you've noticed this in your own life, describe what happened. Someone reading may recognize themselves in it. This reaction occurs before they have said anything offensive, because the identity has already predicted the outcome. Logic does not dissolve this pattern because it is no longer about the situation, but about maintaining a familiar sense of self. If you stopped reacting this way, you might feel uncertain about who you are without this constant mental comparison you might have to confront insecurities you have avoided by framing your irritation as justified and necessary. So the mind keeps repeating the pattern, not because it enjoys discomfort, but because it feels familiar and stabilizing. And this is where most people fail to see that the real issue is not arrogance, but the story the mind has built around it. But to see beyond this story, we need to look at the situation from a completely different angle. What if their need to appear smarter is not a challenge to you, but a display of their own internal insecurity playing out in public view? You begin to notice that superiority is often a performance, a protective layer people use when they feel uncertain about their own value. Their tone, corrections, and constant need to explain may be less about knowledge and more about managing private doubt. When you see this, the interaction stops feeling like a competition and starts looking like a quiet confession you were never meant to take personally. You realize that you were reacting as if they were attacking you when they were actually trying to protect themselves from something unseen. This perspective shifts the emotional weight of the situation, because you are no longer interpreting their behavior as a judgment of your intelligence. Instead, you observe it as a pattern of self-protection, one that has little to do with you and everything to do with them. The irritation begins to soften, replaced by curiosity about why some people need to project competence so intensely. You start to feel less involved, less threatened, and more aware of how differently minds try to maintain a sense of worth. This shift does not require effort, only recognition. And the emotional charge that once felt automatic begins to lose its grip. Quietly, you watch the interaction as if from a distance, noticing the performance without feeling compelled to participate in it. And this is where a quieter change begins inside you. You begin to notice the first signs of irritation before they fully form. Like sensing a wave before it breaks against the shore, the familiar tension still rises, but now it feels observable, as if you are watching your reaction rather than becoming consumed by it. You catch yourself preparing mental arguments, then pause, curious about why the impulse appeared so quickly without invitation. This curiosity interrupts the automatic pattern, creating a small space between their behavior and your internal response. In this space, you feel less urgency to prove anything and more interest in how your mind interprets what is happening. Some conversations pass without leaving the heavy mental residue that they once did. And this feels unfamiliar yet quietly relieving. You find yourself less invested in defending intelligence and more aware of how people express insecurity in subtle ways. The interaction becomes less about you and more about observing the variety of human behaviors without attaching personal meaning. You feel lighter, not because others changed, but because your need to respond has softened without effort. And this is where the experience begins to feel different in a way you did not expect. As you reflect, you realize the people who seem smarter were never the central issue, but a mirror showing patterns within your own mind. You rarely notice every surge of irritation, every mental rebuttal, every subtle tightening of attention points inward, revealing hidden expectations, fragile self-worth, and conditioned responses. You notice that what once felt like a personal attack now becomes an opportunity to witness your own mental scripts quietly. Without judgment, the internal dialogue that used to replay endlessly now appears as a loop you can observe, and the urge to prove yourself diminishes. You sense how much energy was spent maintaining appearances, correcting imagined slights, and rehearsing responses. And how unnecessary the struggle truly was. This reflection reveals that calm was never external, never about controlling others, but about understanding how your mind interprets superiority, expectation, and identity. You see how much of your life was spent measuring intelligence against others, unaware that the measure itself was constructed in your own mind. Interactions remain the same, yet the experience of them changes profoundly. As if the mirror now shows insight rather than threat, you notice a quiet stillness emerging, where observation replaces tension and curiosity replaces the need to react or defend. And in this mirror, you realize the answer has never been about them, but about how you choose to see, respond, and carry your mind. You now understand that handling people who think they are smarter is less about confrontation and more about recognizing the invisible loops shaping your perception. Each interaction reveals conditioned reactions, subtle payoffs, and identity patterns quietly maintained. And observing them provides insight that words or actions never could. The next time you encounter someone projecting superiority, the storm inside may appear, but it can pass differently, more quietly, more consciously than before. Watch, notice, and reflect on these patterns in yourself, allowing observation to replace struggle and curiosity to guide your emotional experience. And as you continue observing, layer by layer, more of the mind's hidden architecture will reveal itself, leaving questions only quiet attention can answer.